So this is a a new moon, in fact, eclipse video. We're going to be having a solar eclipse on June 1st, 2011. This is the chart right before the solar eclipse, excuse me. You see this is in the sign of Taurus, and when we have this eclipse, we're going to have sun and moon in Rohini Nakshatra. Now, Rohini is ruled by the god Prajapati, who became Lord Brahma in later Vedic myth, essentially. So he's what's called the creator, and so this is a very creative nakshatra, Rohini. So sun and moon coming together at that moment. You know, any new moon is the beginning of a new cycle, and so that's what we have when we have a solar eclipse. Is we have the new moon, which is when the sun and moon come together at the same point, and that brings together the masculine and the feminine principle, just like the sperm meeting the egg. It's like an origin point of energy, and it's energized around that sign, because every month we have a new moon in each sign. And so this new moon is going to be in Taurus, so we're starting a Taurus cycle, and of course it also happens to be the eclipse. One of the eclipses, actually, it's a partial eclipse. We're also having an eclipse, another wide orb eclipse next month on July 1st. So, but this eclipse is going to have a lot of the qualities of Taurus and the nakshatra Rohini, which, as I said, it's ruled by Prajapati. The word literally means growing or growth, and it's actually Rohini was the favorite nakshatra of the moon. Now, the nakshatras are the wives of the moon. It seems funny because, you know, you've probably heard me talk about how the moon and Venus are feminine planets. Actually, it means that they bring about feminine energy, which is the quality of being receptive. But all of the planets, the grahas themselves, the energy behind the planets are masculine, even the feminine planets, which means that their origin is to initiate, is to start a certain type of energy. And with Moon and Venus, the type of energy that it starts is the reflective feminine energy. But the Moon is ruled by what's called a deity known as Chandra. So the deity of the Moon is called Chandra, and Chandra is a masculine entity, but of course he's related to the Moon, so he's a sort of, romantic sort of guy who travels around the zodiac, and he moves very quickly, and he has wives. So all of the wives of the Moon are the nakshatras, the 27 different sections of sky. Those are called nakshatras, and they're the wives of the Moon, which means they're what host the moon every day. Just like a man, let's say, traveling around, stops in a different house every day, and there's a wife there to host him, and that's what the nakshatras are. They're the wives of the moon, and Rohini is the favorite nakshatra of the moon. It's the most beautiful, the most pleasing, the most comforting, the one who is the most enjoyable to be around. So it's a very auspicious nakshatra in that way. However, this is a new moon in Rohini, so the moon is actually very dark. So it's not a full moon in Rohini, which happens when the sun is in Scorpio. Often we'll get a new moon in Rohini, or we'll get where the moon is full and bright and in this place of creativity. Here the moon is very dark. And you see, when the moon is dark like this, when you can't see the moon in the sky, then it's a place of stress. You know, the new moons they tend to be emotionally stressful because we feel emotionally drained. And then from that point of being emotionally drained, we actually build ourselves up, and we create the lesson of that month. So right before the new moon is what's called Shivaratri, which is the time when the moon is the darkest, the 14th lunar day of the waxing moon of Krishna Paksha. It's called Shivaratri, which means it's very conducive for meditation and spiritual practices, because the emotions themselves are much more negated. And so our sense of self and our sense of being attached to our emotional content and to those feelings we have to want to connect, and that longing that comes from the moon to want to enjoy life as an embodied person is much more pushed down. But then again, those things that come from wanting to experience life as an embodied person are much less satisfying when the moon is dark. So these are things to realize. So we have this very dark moon, in fact this new moon in Rohini Nakshatra, which is about creativity and growth. So the next month we could expect there to be, it could be a time of growth and creative desire to create beauty and connection in our world. Those things come from Rohini Nakshatra. And of course we also have the moon is here. I'm sorry, we also have Mercury is here. So Mercury has now moved into Taurus, which is quite auspicious because Mercury had been in Pisces and Aries since early March. Actually, right after Mercury went into Pisces, that's when we had the Japanese earthquake and the tsunami and the nuclear problem with the nuclear plant. So let's hope that Mercury now being reestablished in signs where he's powerful, which Taurus and Gemini, Mercury has a lot of strength because they're much more practical and they're oriented towards more rational types of communication and information. Let's hope that we'll see a lot of these situations untangle and they're, restore a certain amount of integrity in managing the details and getting things practically nailed down, because that's what Mercury is about. And this nuclear facility has just been a nightmare. They just can't get it under control, and hopefully through more technology and robotics and practical down-to-earth thinking, they will somehow get this more under control. It's been very hard with when Mercury was in Pisces and then he was in Aries. He's not really strong in either sign because one's related to water, where we blur all the details. One's related to fire, where we're too excited and too passionate. So this eclipse and new moon cycle in Taurus join Mercury bodes well for reestablishing more practical structures and constructs. The last eclipse that happened in January happened with the planets over here, and we had a bunch of planets in Sagittarius. At the time I said that it could definitely show a lot of social unrest and orientation toward righteous principles and actions. Those definitely happened with the Arab Spring, and I also talked about the relationship between Saturn and Mercury at that time and the need to face unpleasantness and hardship in order to get the details in order and to face unpleasant things that we keep putting off. This is what I said at the time. In January, this was before we had the tsunami and the problems at the nuclear facility. And you see what's happened since. It's given us a perspective of our need to really manage and handle, for instance, nuclear energy. This is a big thing of what the last eclipse showed in relationship to the Saturn-Mercury aspect. They were very close, and it was Saturn aspecting Mercury. It was Saturn in Virgo aspecting Mercury in Scorpio. It was a very tight degree. You can look at that video again to see, but I said that at the time it's going to show where we might have some unpleasant situations happen to make us face things that we've been putting off, like dealing with nuclear energy. We keep putting it off as if the problem's going to go away, and it's not. So this was from the last eclipse. Now, so this one shows much more potential for stability and structure, and hopefully getting some of these things more practically under control. Now, the other big stellium of planets are all these planets in Aries. They're in the 12th from the eclipse. We have Mars, Jupiter, Venus in Aries, especially Jupiter, Mars in Aries. Shows a continuation of fighting for our righteous causes and righteous principles. Now, that comes from Jupiter. Jupiter in Aries is going to show that anyway for the next year. But Mars, who is also currently in Aries, brings a lot of militance to that and courage to actually fight for the principle rather than just fight through ideas, which is what Jupiter is about. Mars is literally about, like, say, boots on the ground and fighting for those things. But in addition, we also have Venus joined this Mars and Venus, bringing a greater call for diplomacy and the potential for more diplomacy. I think this can be quite an auspicious reckoning, this eclipse, especially when you consider what has come before, where we're at right now and the problems that we face. Moon, Sun, Mercury, and Taurus definitely establishing a paradigm of structure and solid forms rather than as so much blowing energy apart. Because the last eclipse happened in Sagittarius, we had Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Rahu in Sagittarius, which is about expansion and growth through ideas and militance and pursuing righteousness. And since the last eclipse in January, we've had all the Arab uprisings. Of course, recently we had the death of Osama bin Laden, and we've even also just started things with the Arab-Israel peace process just got reopened, and of course, the catastrophe in Japan, which we still don't have the nuclear facility stable, and these things could impact the whole world. So this is much more stable. It's a sign of Taurus. We have the moon in Rohini, sun and moon in Rohini, but as I say, it can show some problems with creativity, but it should still bring structure and stability. And especially I like Mercury here, because Mercury is really not being influenced negatively at all. It's not even it's sort of combust. Yeah, it's within the orb because it's 12 degrees direct. It's right at that point. It's actually not really combust anymore. And so it can really bring a lot of skill and managing the details and putting things together, or I should say putting things back together again. But Jupiter, Mars, Venus in Aries will still have us fighting for our principles, but with more diplomacy and grace, as Venus is the ruler of the eclipse as well, because Venus is the ruler of Taurus. Joined Mars and Jupiter shows that we're still oriented towards righteousness and a sense of duty and purpose, and having the courage to really fight for those things and fight for what we believe in.